because all of us have had a father, or we wouldn't be here. And whatever circumstances was for your father, all of us, well, we haven't done a very good job. But fortunately, God has been there with us. And pardon? The volume goes up. Hello? Okay. When I first tried it, it was echoing so much that I didn't want to overpower you. But so anyway, happy Father's Day. It's good. We can also look at it as our Happy Father's Day, as Jesus told us to pray, our Father in the heavens, hallowed be your name. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to hallow his name. We have, and Daniel is such an ace over there. We're going to, there we go. Oop. That's a nice photo. So is that. So if you've ever been in Bend, it's dominated by mountains, if you've ever been there. And last summer, I went up on there's a kind of a knob in Bend called Pilot Butte. And right towards sunset, I drove up there. You can drive to the top, and there's sort of a 360-degree view. And looking west, you see the Three Sisters. And it was, I think there was some smoke in the sky that night. And smoke isn't all that great, but it creates great sunsets. And if you look at the two peaks there, one is called Middle Sister, it's sort of the sharp one. And the one to the right is called North Sister. There are three sisters. Anyway, it's one of those images human beings try, but we can't duplicate what God can create, can we? Anything we do is our attempt to try to do something God's already done. And so today the title of this is called Dazzled by God. And this is a big, thick book. It's a novel written in the mid-1800s by a guy named Victor Hugo, who was a French writer. And it's called Les Miserables. The miserable ones is what it means in English. And it has become one of my all-time favorite novels. The basic story is this guy named Jean Valjean, who was convicted of the terrible crime of stealing a loaf of bread for his family and thrown in jail, and he spent 19 years for that terrible crime. He got out and he was very bitter, as you might imagine. And he had this yellow card he had to carry around with him to show that he was a paroled convict. And nobody would take him in. Couldn't find any place to eat or sleep. But he found a place to sleep and eat with this priest. And the priest's name was Charles Francois Bienvenu Myriel. And in French, bienvenue means welcome. What a name. If your middle name was welcome. But the first 50 or 60 or 70 or 80, it's a long book, as you can see. It takes a while to read. It took me about 3 years. It's kind of almost real time to read the thing. But it was because there was so much in it, and it has about 200 pages of footnotes, and so there's a lot to soak in. It's kind of like French history. He has about 50 or 60 pages on the Battle of Waterloo, which of course everybody's interested in. But it has so many great things in it. And the description of this priest, if you ever want to read almost the best description of what a human being can be with God, the first 50 or 60 pages of this wonderful book will give it to you in kind of living color. But there's so much good written about him, but there's a line in it that has just stuck with me, and it's where I got the name for this title. And it hidden in amongst a bunch of things about Monsieur Muriel, who's here today. He did not study God. He was dazzled by him. He didn't study God. He was dazzled by him. And I guess many of us have read the Bible over and over and over, and we hear words all the time. And it hit me. It said, do I just study God sometimes, or am I actually dazzled by God? And here's a description of what dazzle is. Dazzle is to shine brilliantly, to arouse admiration by an impressive display, to overpower with light. Now, you ever flip on the bathroom light in the morning? Oh, whoa. Not only do you have to look into the mirror, but you have these lights that have just suddenly come on, and you're, whoa, like this. That's dazzled. Or to impress deeply, to overpower or confound with brilliance. That's what it means to be dazzled. And interesting this morning, one of the songs that the worship team picked, and thank you very much once again for that. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Dan, for running our sound. The song, "Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus, Look Full in His Wonderful Face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace." And I almost asked Mary and Luane to play that song, but it just shows you God must have been working this morning, because our minds melded and we didn't even know it. So, to dazzle. And let's look at the next thing. Okay, we hear in the Bible, in Proverbs especially a lot, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And in the New Testament, it talks about the church walks in the fear of the Lord and in the comfort of the Holy Spirit. So I think many times I've thought, well, the fear of the Lord is you're shaking in your boots, you see a snake, or whatever your particular phobia might be. We think of that as fear, or I'm afraid of the future. But I'm beginning to think that perhaps we could plug into that phrase, the fear of the Lord, would another way to be saying, I have been dazzled by God. I've been wowed by God. That's what the fear of the Lord is. And that makes sense then to me, that if the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, the being wowed by God, or whatever colloquial term you want to use, you're dazzled by God, that gives us this grand perspective in life, doesn't it? Where essentially what we're being dazzled by God means I'm comparing what God is and what God can do to what I am and what I can do. And, you know, the ledger's not really all that even, is it? I couldn't go out and create a scene like North and Middle Sister, for example. I can't bring the sun up every day. The fear of the Lord, I think, is quite possibly being dazzled or wowed. And, you know, he uses many ways to do this. And what I'd like us to do to feel today, this photo right here was taken about 65 years ago. The little fella being held there is my brother, Paul, who is now 68 years old. And I don't know, I figure he's probably 2 or 3 there, somewhere in there. Doesn't look like he'd had all that great a day. And the wonderful lady holding him is my mother, Alice, who at that time was probably, let's see, she would have been about 38 years old or something like that. She died at 94, about 9 years ago. And I think being dazzled by God, there are many ways he does it, but one of the ways is he takes each one of us like this. My brother Paul just had, about a month ago, he had this emergency surgery, intestinal surgery that just came out of the blue, and he had to quickly get it done. That's how he was feeling then. And that's how he said he was feeling, writhing in pain and everything. But I just pictured God, I pictured my mom holding him like that in his arms. That's what God does. When I talked to Paul just yesterday or the day before, we were talking about this photo, and he said, you know, that's what he believes Abba Father's like, where he wraps around us. So I want each of us today, the whole theme of this is God's wrapping around you. He wants to dazzle you. And so then another way we can look at it is we are, and through life, swimming in God's great ocean of love, if you want to look at it that way. We are, the atmosphere surrounds us and is in us, but we can't see it. At least as humans, we can see the water and we can visualize a fish. And how does a fish breathe? What's the device that they have? Gills, right? And I don't know exactly how they extract the oxygen from the water to go through their little gill things to then supply their blood supply with oxygen. But I love that image that we're these fish swimming through God's great ocean, him dazzling us all the time with his glory and greatness. And because here's what Paul said to the Athenians, up, you know, with the Parthenon right behind him, you know, the big columns up on top of the Acropolis in Athens, Greece. And they had all these shrines and everything, and there was this one to the unknown God, is what but he said, okay, the God who made everything gives us life and breath and all things. And in him, we live, we move, and sometimes when we ache, it's harder to move, but he's still letting us move. And we have our being. my very existence, everything comes from God. And so today, think of that, those 6 things, which are everything we are, life. Right now, could everybody just take a deep breath? Sometimes we have to ask Charlie, our grandchild, to take a deep breath. And he's learned it. He's not yet 2 years old, but it's pretty funny because he'll be doing something. Well, sometimes we all need to take a deep breath, but the gulp we just had came from God. And we do it involuntarily at our best. I mean, because it's when we have to get hooked up to something that we're involuntary. Okay. Today we're going to talk about 2 guys that I think were dazzled by God. And 2 guys named Paul and his buddy Silas. We don't hear as much about Silas, but he did the same stuff as Paul in a number of things, so he just doesn't get as much credit. But we're going to pick him up in a little town called Philippi, which, if you look at the modern day Greece, it's kind of in eastern Greece, almost where Greece hooks up with Turkey. So it's hooked up kind of on the ocean there. And here's Paul. He comes into town, and I'm going to read, if you have your Bible, I'm reading from Acts chapter 16. And the story is Paul, they'd gone out to a place of prayer, is what it said. And there was this girl who kept coming out and sort of bugging them every day. And she had the ability to foretell the future. And she kept coming out to Paul and Silas and saying, "You're the servants of the Most High God." And we'll pick it up here in verse 18. And this she did for many days. But Paul, greatly annoyed, turned and said to the Spirit, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And he came out that very hour. But when her masters saw that their hope of profit was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to the authorities. Okay, jealousy, greed. Okay, that was the background of this. And they brought them to the magistrates and said, "These men, being Jews, exceedingly trouble our city, and they teach customs which are not lawful for us, being Romans, to receive or observe." Give me a break. Anyway, unjust, but that's what they were using. Then the multitude rose up together against him, and the magistrates tore off their clothes, commanded them to be beaten with rods. And when they had laid many stripes on them, they threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to keep them securely. In one version says in the inner jail. Having received such a charge, he put them in the inner prison and fastened their feet in stocks. Wow. Let's look at their circumstances. Where are they? They're in this stinky, well, one, they've just been unjustly charged, right? They didn't do something against Roman law. This was just a ridiculous charge because those guys had lost their money. Where were they? What was their locale? Well, I've been in a bunch of prisons and jails and whatnot. I don't imagine this looked anything like those. It was probably some hole that had been dug or some cave or something. You just picture water dripping and dirt on the floor or rocks or whatever. Not a very nice place. It was dark, pitch black. What time was this? And we're going to look at that. But it was kind of lonely, although if it's all dark, you don't know who's with you, I guess. They had wounds, they were beaten severely, and they're very, very restricted. Not being able to move around very well is a pretty intense restriction. Whether we can't do it or we've been restrained in some way. So here's all these things. And then, so we got the picture. It's not exactly a worship service like this, is it? I can't really imagine a worse circumstance, really. I mean, okay, but let's look at what these guys were doing. Verse 25. But at midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. I'll be honest, I read this the other night. I was going to talk about something else completely, but the other night, I happened to be reading this, and it was after 11 o'clock one night. This verse right here always has the same effect on me. What? They're beaten, they're in prison, and here these two guys are singing hymns and praying. And let's see what happens. Suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened and everyone's chains, were loosed. And the keeper of the prison, awaking from sleep, and seeing the prison doors open, supposed the prisoners had fled, drew his sword, was about to kill himself, but Paul called out with a loud voice, saying, "Hey, don't harm yourself. We're all here." Then he, the jailer, called for a light, ran in, and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas, and he brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" Now, I think the subtitle, you could say, "What must I do to be saved?" What must I do to become like you guys? You're singing. You're in here. You didn't run off. You kept me from killing myself. What do I have to do to become like you? Right? I mean, they weren't preaching some sermon. They weren't doing anything like that. Their souls allowed them to pray and sing hymns to God in the worst possible circumstance. Now, I think, let's see, next one, Daniel? Next one? There we go. Okay, I think one of the principles that God struck me with, and there are many, many things you can take out of the story, but one of them I see in this is, it's a super encouragement for us. And that is, God was helping Paul and Silas in their worst extremities, their hurts, their darkness, their loneliness, their wounds, their injustices. They had it all jammed together there, didn't they? It wasn't like just one of those things. It was this huge ball of stuff that these guys got dumped on. But because he helped them, because he had dazzled those guys, they in turn were able to help this other guy in his worst circumstances, right? And we get into some circumstances sometimes, and, well, maybe we don't always react like that, and it's understandable. But they were in prison, but weirdly enough, they were free, weren't they? So next, the question becomes, what in the world allowed these two guys to respond like that? Do you think that it was their first time they had ever prayed and sang hymns? What do you think? Give knock 3 times on the ceiling if you think no, I don't know, you can't knock on that ceiling. But it's sort of like, I never was a very good baseball player, but as a little kid, you pee-wee and your neck looked like a toothpick with a apple like this, and your legs were toothpicks sticking out of some shorts, and have this hat that's way too big, and you walk up to and we never had t-ball because this was 150 years ago when I played baseball, but they just threw at you. And I think I started when I was in the 2nd grade, and you'd stand there like this, and well, we sort of practiced beforehand, but the idea being, in any sport, like if the first time she'd ever tried to play the piano was this morning, well, it'd sound like me if I tried to play it, and it wouldn't be very good. But the point is, I think they had such a habit of doing this, they'd practiced it over and over and over. God, you're so good. And I don't know what the hymns, I don't know what their voices sounded like, for that matter. I don't know if Paul was a good singer. I mean, a few towns before, they dragged him out and threw rocks at his head and thought he was dead. So I don't know how great his voice was at the time. And I don't know if they were praying, now I lay me down to sleep, I pray, I don't know what they were praying either. But they were so used to it in every situation that this is kind of normal for them, I think. And it helps us to go, well, anything short of this, maybe I can practice before I get dragged in and beaten and thrown in some stink hole. But I think, how'd they respond? And I think, let's go to the next thing. I think that's not very, very clear, but I think, in other words, my question is, what about God dazzled them enough that the things of earth were growing strangely dim to them in the light of his glory and grace? They weren't looking at, oh man, this is a stink hole, and well, these other guys are kind of, man, I don't want to be with them. And Paul, did you know, why did they drag us in here? I don't get that Paul and Silas were lamenting, and maybe they did beforehand, before somebody picked up what they were saying, maybe whispering to each other. I kind of doubt it. I think they were just so overwhelmed with God that the things of earth were strangely dim right there. Now, I don't know exactly what about God dazzled them. One of the verses LaWayne read this morning was, I've been crucified with Christ, or yet I live, and not I, but Christ lives in me. And that's Paul writing this. And you think about some of the things he wrote to the Philippians later, where he said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, right? And when you put it back in the context of what happened to him in that city, that statement becomes pretty amazing. I mean, it's pretty amazing as it is, but when you realize what he did. So I don't know how God dazzles us individually. I'll just give you a few ideas on what or how God dazzles me, because I can't really say what might dazzle you, but here are a few possibilities. And I love being outside. From the time I was my brother Paul's age, my mom would let us just be outside because we lived in a tiny town and you could go outside. And so here are a few things. And these are some photos I took. This was up this is on the other side of the Three Sisters, looking at them east. And you can see clear in the middle is North and Middle Sister from the other direction. But sunrises dazzle me. This morning I was just listening to a song by the artist Chris Tomlin. And he wrote a song called "Nobody Loves Me Like Jesus." And the very first line is something like, "Morning, I see you in the sunrise every morning. It's like a picture painted for me. Love letters in the sky." And that's a pretty good line, isn't it? God's given us these love letters all over the place in the sky. Just go out today and look at some clouds or something. How does something that weighs so much, a cloud, it weighs thousands of pounds, million, or I don't know, a big one probably weighs millions. How does that stay in the sky? Love letters in the sky, as God's given them to us all the time. The next one is a sunset at the beach. It's so lovely at the beach on a kind of a cloudy night when you get that sunset, and they're all different, aren't they? But you stand there and you go, wow, there goes the sun. Not here comes the sun, but there goes the sun. Doo-doo. Anyway, he's there, he's dazzling us. And then I just threw in, just because I like this photo, the next one of, there's another sunset. He's dazzling us. Or if you go out at night, this was a lunar eclipse some time ago. And how many of you were able to see the solar eclipse some years ago? Full solar eclipse where that was one of the, Mary and I went up to Salem. It was right in the path of the thing. And around noon, it's like the moon and the sun clicked into place. And I've never experienced things quite like that. I had this involuntary reaction where I started crying. And it sounds kind of dramatic, but it was noon and it suddenly became pitch dark. And you can see Venus up by this disc, this black disc. And here's just a little thing God throws out every once in a while to go, hey, remember, I'm God and you aren't. And so we have the stars. And if you look at the stars, I love looking at the planets, and you just think about the distances in the sky. It's almost kind of terrifying to think that something's a light year away, or 10 or a million or a billion light years away. Wow, it just kind of gives you almost makes your skin crawl, but you're glad that there's somebody friendly way out there, or God. He's out there. Okay, another way that I'm dazzled by God is through fauna. Beautiful butterflies. Or next one, Daniel. This was a little bunny that crawls under the fence up at my daughter Laura's house, and he just comes out there in the morning and nibbles on their grass. It's not like a cow that takes out the whole grass or something, but he's pretty cute. We also have a lot of next flora you can look at. This was up on Mount Pisgah, and I didn't see any cougars up there. For some of you who had seen but this is one of my all-time favorite flowers. It's called a tiger lily, and they're just hiding up in the brush. And You just think, wow, for nobody other than just God, because he likes doing stuff. He puts this stuff out there. Another way that really speaks to me, and I'm sure speaks to a lot of us, is the power of music. And whether you're Julie Andrews about ready to trip off a cliff somewhere on top of the Alps, twirling around, the hills are alive with the sound of music. Or if you're in your own car, probably many of us are the world's best singers in our car. You're cruising down the road and you got the windows down and woo! And or if some people like to sing in a shower or something like that. Wherever you are, we're great singers. If nobody's listening, of course. But there's so many ways of music. I love percussion, or like kids learning how to sing for the first time. Or isn't the power of music is amazing, isn't it? How you can, and combined with the next thing, let's look at the next one there, Daniel. When you combine music with words, what do you get? You get the world's best memory device, don't you? I don't know why it is I can hear about 2 words of something. Somebody maybe even says it, and suddenly it's like the jukebox in your head starts going from 50 years ago, and all these songs, and some of them are good, and some of them maybe you should just put in the back of your jukebox somewhere. But the power of music, and look at what Paul and Silas were doing. They were singing. Is there some mysterious power when we hear our own voice singing? And I thought about this. And I've tried to do this, and I won't ever sing any of these for you or anyone else. But I've tried to take like a favorite verse and just make up a song, and it's a pretty corny tune most of the time because I don't know what I'm doing. But there's something about hearing my own voice saying something to God. It's great when you pray in your head, because we got to do that a lot. But there's something oddly powerful when God hears my voice, and I hear my voice. Have you ever heard a tape recording of your voice and you go, who in the world is that speaking? It's kind of like our head. Other people hear you differently than you hear yourself. But God's okay with that. But I thought, how about this? Let's try to take a favorite verse of yours and just sing it to yourself aloud. And it doesn't matter if you can't carry a tune or if you're the world's greatest singer, because God just likes hearing you. And I think it releases something in us that nothing else can do. Nothing really else can do. Music. God created it for us, and he created words. They're praying. I don't know if their praying was chanting. I don't know if it was some sort of from the Psalms that they were, the Psalter, the Psalm books that have historically been a great place to look for. Take a psalm, a favorite psalm, or like a little line of a psalm, and just sing it to yourself. And I don't know, I've found in the last, because I asked myself, what dazzles me? And it may not be the same thing, but we have to work at it. And God will help us so. He'll release his great power. So we have music, we have words. I'm coming back to my mother. We have people. who dazzle us, don't we? Every one of us most likely can point to someone in our life. And Eric, you just pointed to whom? Caroline. The people dazzle us. And that's good. And that's how it's supposed to be. Because most of us didn't have some direct visitation from God, like Samuel or somebody like that. We first learned about God through people. I'm unabashedly grateful to my mother because she's the one who held me, and I felt like I was just safe. And I didn't even know that. I couldn't articulate that till, here I am a few years later, and I can understand that. So people do. And then next one, and many more people. So this is also about, 68 years ago or so. And this guy in the uniform was my dad, who was running a gasoline station at the time. And they used to have uniforms. Years ago, these guys, they'd dress up in their little caps and whatnot. The only thing I have really of my dad's possessions, I have this cap that he was wearing. It's a Shell motor cap. The Shell on it. And Dad helped me because Dad's business didn't prevail. He tried to run a gas station, and he was such a nice guy. He let people do a lot of credit and various things. And but he ended up not doing that, and he had to go back and work in a mill. But I still look at my dad as having overcome and being successful because of who he was and who he is. And so I say happy Father's Day to him. I say happy Father's Day to anybody here who's a father who thinks maybe I haven't been successful, or any of us. Success is not measured. Jesus said, it's not the abundance of our possessions that's the measure of a person. It's our hearts. How dazzled are we with God? And finally, well, not finally, you can make a list really long for yourself, but I think the last one, we're directly affected by God. He directly dazzles us. The song we just sang, when we turn our eyes upon Jesus, these things of earth, because he's so brilliant. The word, man, that guy is brilliant. Well, Jesus, as one guy put it, was the smartest guy who ever lived. And you go to some of these grand lists of people who are great, they don't usually include Jesus as smart. He's nice and kind of, whatever, but he's not smart. But he's the smartest person who ever lived. Look at him as a lawyer, a doctor, a fisher, you name it, a psychologist, a builder. He only built the earth, no big deal. But the last image I have here was, I guess I have this theme of the three sisters. This is Sal's sister. And some years ago, my brother-in-law and his son-in-law and my nephews hoofed it to the top. And the little guy on the right is 11 years old. And his dad didn't hold his hand the whole way up, but quite a bit. And I captured this because it so represents to me, to be dazzled by God, we just walk with him. It's simple. We just walk with him. Let him hold our hand. And there was this guy named Enoch, kind of mysterious guy. He was listed in the top 10 of the first people. And it said he walked with God. And it said after his son was born, he walked with God for 300 years. Now that's quite a while. None of us will probably make it that long, walking here at least. But Enoch walked with God, and it said in Hebrews, it says, and he pleased God. He pleased God. And it said, some versions say he was translated. Some versions say he just wasn't anymore. I don't know what happened to the guy, if he was just walking along one day and then just sort of evaporated into, I don't know. But I love that notion. He just walked with God. And that ultimately is how we're best dazzled, isn't it? How he best encourages us. He holds our hand. He's don't let go of his hand. I pray that God, would you weld my hand to yours, weld my heart to yours. I don't want to let go of his hand. And let's go back to this last thought. All of us will have loneliness or hurts or extremities, loneliness, we'll be wounded, we'll face injustices. But you know what? As we're dazzled by God, there'll be somebody in that. Daryl, you've been a great example where you are God's living, throbbing transmitter of goodness in your current home, right? You're being dazzled by God, and you're letting others be dazzled by him. And that's all he wants to do with us, is whatever circumstances we're in today, whether they're good, whether they aren't as good, let's just let him let's be like fish and soak in his great ocean of love. And so then all the hurting folks in our lives, we can be that great transmitter. And Daryl, thank you for being here. And thank you for being that. And thank you all. You've all done that. And it's pretty astounding, really. So thank you. And let us, I guess we'll just close. And maybe we could just, I'm not going to attempt to be the singer, but can we just sing that last song, Turn Our Eyes Upon Jesus? Just a couple lines of it. Yeah, Daryl? What's that? Yeah, you bet. Yeah. Yeah. There you are. Yeah, you sure are. Amen. And for those on Zoom, if you couldn't hear, Daryl said he's a living testament to God's love. A year ago, he couldn't even walk. And today, here he is. He got up and walked to the pew, and amen. Yep. Okay, Mary? Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look for faith, and the things of earth will grow strange in the light of his glory and grace. Thank you all, and I hope the week is dazzling.